Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 214 of the MTGGoldfish podcast. It's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we have a very special cast this week. Richard taking the week off, he's not here. Krim is joining us though. What's up, Krim?
How you doing?
I'm doing well, and replacing Richard this week, we have a very special guest, MPL player, really awesome Magic player, content producer, streamer, Seth Manfield. So, Seth, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you give us a little introduction? I'm sure I missed some of your laurels and accolades there. For the audience, I'm sure most people know you, but just in case, we have some people that aren't familiar with you and what you do in the Magic world.
Oh yeah, I appreciate you for having me. I and also distinguishing between Saffron Olive and Seth, because we both have the same name, which is kind of if Krim is asking, hey Seth
podcast,
yeah,
what's up, Seth?
But yeah, I have been playing Magic for 18 years now. The past maybe 6-ish, I've been actually doing this as my full-time gig, just playing and producing content. So, and then of course recently we had the big MPL announcement of the 32 players that are going to be a part of that, and I'm fortunate enough to be one of them, so that puts me in kind of a unique mix, a group. And yeah, I think I've distinguished myself throughout my years of playing, both a World Championship win and a Pro Tour trophy, which are now Mythic Championships, but at the time it was a Pro Tour, so...
Yeah, I think you are widely considered to be one of the best players in the world. I know when you talk about over the last 5 years or so, the best players, your name comes up pretty often on the short list of best current players in the world. So definitely pretty impressive. And as far as content, where can people actually find your content if they want to check you out streaming, or your videos or articles and whatnot?
Yeah, so if you want to check me out at Seth Manfield MTG on Twitch. That's my Twitch handle, and I'm still kind of getting my stream schedule set, but definitely Friday nights is my big day, and then I've only been streaming for kind of about a month and a half now, so yeah, it's still new to me. And then I've been writing for TCG Player for over, I think, 5 years now, so if you want to check out my articles or my videos, TCG Player would be the place to do it. As far as the comment you made about being the best player, one of the best players in the world, I appreciate that. I try not to talk about it too much, but it's nice that people notice that.
So one of the other things that you just started to do, and we'll wrap back around to streaming. That's something I wanted to ask you about as we go along. But the reason that you're here today, or one of the big reasons, is you have a new course with one of the sponsors of our podcast, which is spikesacademy.com, talking about sideboarding, I believe. So can you let us know, and before you get into it, I guess I should say, if you were interested in Seth's course and Spikes Academy, they have some really great players, really cool classes. I believe the first 200 people that sign up for the course using the code Sideboarding can get 15% off, so thank you to Spikes Academy for supporting the show. But I want to hear your thoughts on this course, Seth. So what is this course? How did it come about? Give us some info on that.
Sure. So, yeah, this Spikes Academy course is unique. It's unlike anything I've ever done before. I actually went to Europe to film the course with some of the guys that run the Spikes Academy, and I've never gone this in depth about any subject in Magic. And then sometimes I have trouble explaining myself, but I kind of unfolded all of the different layers that go into sideboarding, which is just kind of like this thing that I think a lot of players just kind of do, where they have, their sheet of paper with their notes about their ins and outs for a matchup and things like that. But I went way, way, way more deep, far deeper than that. And so there's a bunch of different modules. There's 40 quizzes, which I came up with the quizzes by myself. So you can watch me on video, kind of, and yeah, it's an amazing course. I've never like it's basically beyond a written article. Like it's basically like it's probably the best piece of content that I've ever done. No offense to TCG Player because they're not affiliated with this at all, but yes, but the course is great, and I think a lot of players it's something that they struggle with. Like they want to know. Like whenever I get have a question about a deck that I've played or I've done well with, it's always, "Hey Seth, how do I sideboard?" And rather than asking me that question, maybe take a look at my Spikes Academy course.
I think that's a really good point. I think sideboarding is, especially for, I guess all players, but new players especially, it is one of the hardest things to get about Magic, to the point where we've kind of seen Wizards acknowledge this to some extent with the focus on best of one on Magic Arena, specifically because sideboarding is so difficult. So we're not going to really get into the pluses and minuses of best of one on Arena and all that, but it is definitely a really hard and complicated aspect of Magic. So your course, Seth, is this something for newer players? Like how basic do you begin? Do you need to have a pretty good grasp of sideboarding to actually take advantage of the course? Or is this for someone that is at the very basic beginnings of learning how to sideboard as well?
That's a great question. I designed the course from my own perspective, and I have more knowledge than someone who's just a beginner. So there may be things or aspects of what I'm talking about that a beginner might not pick up on, but then there will be other aspects that they will pick up on. I think, an F&M level player is kind of where I would like. Probably you want to have at least some experience playing in a competitive environment, but beyond that, like there's a lot that goes into it. I think especially if you're an aspiring, like my main target audience, if I was to pick one target audience, would be someone who's aspiring to kind of go to a Magic Fest and do well, but hasn't really reached that level yet.
Yeah, so it sounds like it really has something for pretty much everyone. Maybe if you're brand new to the game, you want a little bit more of a foundation first, but it sounds like that covers pretty much all ranges of competitive players. What do you think, Grim? Do you have any sideboarding questions about this course that you want to get out there?
I don't have any questions, but I do agree that it is a crazy thing to kind of like grasp if you're a new player. And I guess when you think about it, I've played for a minute, so like for me, sideboarding has just always been a part of the game. But then I've played with friends, friends who are just starting up Magic or starting up Magic again, and the only like knowledge they have is like kind of like tabletop, right? And so, like Seth had mentioned there, like people that have almost gone to like a Magic Fest but haven't quite yet, and like sideboarding to them is an entirely different thing. They like, why do you do this on the play? Why do you do this on the draw? So, it is a very tough course to like think about. So that's why actually I was talking to Seth about it last night on stream. I was like, I'm going to actually have Seth coach me. So I don't at least, the goal is to get better than 64th place at the Invitational.
Well, your sideboarding isn't going to come into that too much, I think,
yeah.
right?
Yep, no. But you know what? I'm going to still have Seth coach me anyways.
So, before we move on to some other topics, do you have any advice, Seth, for, let's say, a brand new player? Let's say someone that's brought into the game by Magic Arena, which is bringing in a lot of new players. That person is used to playing arena mode, playing best of one matches, and they're like, all right, I want to go and try an F&M, or I want to go and just experience a Magic Fest. Do you have any advice for those players, sideboard-wise? Because these are players that maybe have never built a sideboard, had never sideboarded with someone else's deck that they net decked or whatever. Is there anything that those players should keep in mind if they're just starting out their journey into sideboarding?
Yeah, for sure. I think you just want to kind of have a grasp of what types of cards in your main deck. Like, look at your main deck and think about the types of cards you might want to take out in, like, a couple of matchups. Like, you don't have to go through, all right, there's like 12 different decks, or there's however many different decks. But maybe you're struggling against, like, winning your game ones. Maybe you're struggling against a couple of decks. And just, like, think about those, like, what could I have? Maybe it's life gain. Like, something as simple as, I need to have a way to gain life against red aggro. And so I need to have like that, like a specific type of effect, or I need to have a removal spell, or I need to have a counter spell or a discard spell, rather than going into specific cards, because you can find that. Like, there's the internet, right? So like, we can look at sideboard guides, or we can pull up something that has cards that you might look at for a deck. But I find that thinking on your own is really, like, as a game plays out, and thinking, especially if you lose, what could have helped me from this position?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And at a basic level, I mean, that is the simplest sideboarding, is you're trying to get your bad cards out and get in good cards for the matchup. As far as your course, is it designed for any specific format? Is it mostly like standard, or is it generic in a way where it applies to all formats? Who is format-wise, who is it specifically for?
Sure. So there's actually 6 different modules to the course, which cover, and then within the modules, there's actual different lessons laid out. One of the modules of the 6 is specifically limited, but if you're not a limited player, you can just, the other five have plenty of context, and then I've got a specific section for limited. But other than that, because limited it's very different, just because the decks are so much smaller, and the cards that you're working with, like, maybe it's sealed and you're potentially boarding into completely different colors. But in terms of standard or modern or even legacy, it's all there. Like, my course, I use some applications that are more recent. So, like, I'll talk about a card like a Duress or a Golden Demise, or something that has recently come up, because that's just like something that I remember right now. So there are a couple of standard applications in terms of me saying, okay, this card works in this situation, but I wouldn't say it's format based. It's kind of sideboarding, wherever. And if you want something more format based, there are other courses beyond mine on Spikes Academy. Like, I know Reed did specifically only modern, but mine is not like that.
Anyway, we're going to move on here in a minute and talk about some other topics while we have Seth here. But is there anything else about sideboarding? Oh, yes, that's right. The other thing I wanted to ask about, Seth, is something that people say about sideboarding, and I think it's really hard for new and even intermediate players to grasp, is a lot of pro players talk about building your deck as a 75-card deck rather than a 60-card deck with a 15-card sideboard. Is that how you think of deck building personally? And is that something that comes up in your course, the idea of building a 75-card deck rather than 60 with a 15-card sideboard?
Yeah, that's a great point, Saffron. That's actually one of my modules in the course, and exactly, like, best of one, that's different. You'll see decks specifically designed for best of one. Here, I like to think about, like, how do these 15 cards interact with my main deck? Because they really are, like, I like to think of them together in many ways. And in some situations, what I'll do is, because I want to have the maximum amount of ability to swap cards in and out, what I will do is I will often move cards to, like, I'll have sideboard cards in my main deck to make room for more sideboard cards. Because I like to prioritize, in best of 3 Magic, sideboarded games, and being able to just, like, sometimes I'll have a worse time in my first game because I'll have, like, a lot of different cards in my main deck, but that'll allow me to, like, kind of mix and match a lot better after board. So yeah, exactly. Like, I don't look at it as, okay, this is my best possible configuration for game 1. I look at it as this is my best possible 75.
Yeah. Well, this sounds like a really awesome course. I might have to sign up and take this course because it sounds pretty helpful and pretty awesome. Just because it's such a tricky topic, so seems like a really great addition to Spike's Academy. So I'm excited for that. Any other sideboarding thoughts from either Seth or Krim before we move on to some of our other topics?
Make sure to if you want to know more about building a 75 is a great example of one of the topics. I talk a lot about over sideboarding and how maybe you board in too many cards. You kind of want to do too much. And then I also go into specific deck archetypes and what that means. Like how do you sideboard from an aggressive perspective, or are you a control I kind of have something in there for everyone. So
And if people want to check out this course, just a reminder, it's at spikesacademy.com, and still the first 200 people that sign up can get 15% off if they use the code sideboarding. And if you want to know more about the course, it's spikes_academy on Twitter. And what's your Twitter, Seth, if people want to hit you up on there and ask you about your
Twitter
course?
is at Seth Manfield. I've already got a bunch of positive feedback from the course, and the discount is still going. I really appreciate it, and if you've been following me throughout the years and you want to know a way you can give back in some sort of way, go ahead and join Spike's Academy, because I think it's and they're still growing. I've been really impressed. They've been very professional.
Yeah, they seem like they're doing a really good job. We had Reed on, maybe it was like 3 months ago now, when his modern course dropped, and then, Paulo had the original course, so it seems like they're consistently putting out new courses with some really great players. So I'm excited to see what's next for Spike's Academy as well, because it seems like they're just constantly putting out really unique content that it's not what you get at all the other websites. Like, it's so in-depth on certain topics, so it's a really unique niche, I think, that Spike's Academy has found in the Magic community.
Yep, for sure. I don't think I'll be the last Spike's Academy course. It seems like every time a course comes out, the interest continues to build around it.
Yeah, for sure. So, anyway, since we have Seth on, we wanted to ask him about some pro stuff that, normally on the podcast, we have a news and somewhat casual perspective, so we gotta take advantage of having a pro player on. So, Seth, probably one of the biggest changes for you, I assume, in the past year, or maybe your entire Magic career, is the start of the Magic Pro League, and you were one of the 32 that are in this league. So, what do you think of this Magic Pro League? How big of a life change has this been for you?
It's been something I've always been dreaming about, honestly. So I've been playing Magic, right, at the high levels, the highest levels of the game, but it hasn't really felt it hasn't been recognized in the way that I would have liked it to have been until the Magic Pro League, which it really hasn't even fully kicked off, right? We've got this Mythic Invitational coming up at the end of this month, which I see as kind of the start of the year for the league. And I know, Krim, you'll be joining me there, but
yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, that's good. These events, that event is $1 million prize pool, right? That is huge, especially considering that the field is 64 players, and that's just one event. There's going to be multiple events, similar events like that. So the money is great. I have a contract specifically from the designers of the designers of the game that I love to play, right? I've wanted to have a more intimate connection with Wizards of the Coast, and now I know that a lot of the Magic community is very jealous of me, right? Because they want to, we always see what can Wizards of the Coast do to make you happier in this, whatever respect it might be, right? There's always going to be something that we can complain about, right? Because we're Magic players, and that's what we do. We love to have something that's there. But for me, this is I can stop complaining for a little while. I can sit back and relax and just kind of enjoy my time to shine. I'm hoping that this continues, because it seems like a really great thing. The streaming has been like, now I know what streaming is. Like before I was just kind of like in the dark about that in many ways, and that was my own ignorance. But it's kind of opened these doors that I didn't know were gonna open up for me, and I'm thankful. I'm looking forward to it. I'm also kind of like, I get nervous for these types of situations when I'm playing against these other like insane players. Like these are like, we're splitting hairs, right? If we're talking about me or talking about Paolo or like Reed or like, it's like, so we're all great players. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be one of the greatest experiences of my life to be a part of this. And yeah, like I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited.
Yeah, I think it's pretty awesome from an outside perspective, too, to have 32 of the best players in the game that are streaming for so many hours a week and going to be doing like these tournaments. So there's so much high quality Magic content now that wasn't necessarily there. I mean, there's always been Magic content, but you were talking about picking up streaming for the first time. That's not something that you really did before the MPL came around. So we get all these cool streams and cool content. There's like podcasts that have come out with some of the MPL players. So it feels like the security that having this contract opens up a lot of doors for doing cool things that maybe you just couldn't do before if you're so focused on your normal content in tournaments to make up your Magic income and to support your life and whatnot.
Oh, exactly. I mean, I think if you looked at the Twitter account of any pro Magic player within the past few years, you'd probably hear something saying like, well, how come I'm still making pennies for doing this well or something, which isn't, it's an exaggeration, right? But you could definitely see statements like that where, because, well, the truth of the matter was we weren't, like, even though I would maybe do well at a Grand Prix or have a good Pro Tour finish here or there, that would just kind of make up for other expenses like my travel, my hotel, my eating out every day, or like renting a place for a week to test with my teammates. So like there's all these other expenses that would go into the actual tournaments. So for me, I wasn't making money from Wizards of the Coast really. Maybe I was in my very, very, very specific situation, but in general, none of us were. And part of it was, yeah, like some of the costs to, as I just mentioned. So TCG player was how I was making my living, but now like Wizards of the Coast has really, really stepped it up and taken it to that next level. And it kind of makes me feel like the celebrity set. Like I know that people know me, but it's almost this like celebrity status. Like you're one of these like 32, and I don't know, like I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but it's great. Like so far it's great. It's great for me.
Yeah, it seems like it is super awesome and exciting. How has the streaming been? One thing I get a lot of questions about from people, especially now that Magic Arena is taking off, is I want to start streaming, but I don't really know how to do it. And you're kind of in a unique position where you have just had to go through this on your own and started streaming. So how has that transition been, and how have you liked streaming so far?
You know, I didn't know how I would like streaming, because sometimes I have trouble talking to people. Like I've had bad interviews on camera and stuff like that, and so I was like, maybe people just won't like me. I had no idea how many viewers I would get or how popular it would be, or if I could even play on MTG Arena competently. Like I was scared of trying a new thing. But in everything, all of this is new to me. Like I didn't know about streaming. I didn't know, like playing MTG Arena. I'm only few months into that, crafting my decks with my wild cards. It's fun. Like it's new. I didn't know how big of a fan base I really had, because I had no way of knowing until I started streaming, and there was like a few hundred people that would pop in and they wanted to watch Seth Manfield play Magic and do whatever I might be doing on stream, and I can now it gives me an easier way to interact with my fan base. Like, before I didn't really have that. Like, maybe you could come up to me at a tournament if you saw me and ask me a question, or you could pop a notification on Twitter my way, but like, really there wasn't this interaction of, hey, I can go on stream and just ask Seth the question and he'll just answer it right there, and you can watch him play games, and it's not just me, right? Like, I like streaming, but I also really like watching streaming also. So like, whenever I'm not streaming, I find myself like I find myself on other people's streams, just like chilling and just like watching whatever the mess they're getting into, and they give me ideas as well. So that is a really fun aspect of it, and it just kind of helps build the community even more. I think like after the last, I think it was like the pre-release streamer event type thing, like that was huge, right? Like Ravnica Allegiance, I think the numbers were just like went through the roof as far as I could tell, as far as the amount of viewership. Everything is kind of just getting big, and I have no idea if it's a bubble or if it can just keep growing. Hopefully, like, it's been great so far, so I'm hoping that my audience and just the community in general, the Twitch community, seems like it's expanding.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, and it takes a while. So I expect that the MPL players and you too will keep seeing growth as it goes along, because I think a lot of streaming is just like the consistency and showing up every week, and the audience starts to grow. So it's definitely a really exciting time for Magic in general as far as streaming. One other thing I wanted to ask both you and Krim about, because actually you're both going to be in this tournament, is the Mythic Invitational, which is coming up in a couple of months. So I'm sure you're both preparing, and I'm not going to ask you to give away if you have secret decks or something. It is $1 million tournament, so you don't got to give away any of your secrets. But how has your preparation been going for this Mythic Invitational tournament at the end of the month?
Yeah, it's really funny that you mentioned that, and we're sitting in the same call right now. Yeah, because Krim and I, we literally battled each other like three like a bunch of times, like while he was on stream, and it's fun. Like, it's awesome to just kind of like have players like, oh, the Asian Avenger, like, I recognize that name, like, I know who I'm playing against. I can actually, after the match, I'm not gonna do any ghosting or anything like that, but in some cases I might already be watching his stream, and I would have to actually leave the stream and come back to the stream because we got paired against each other in a match. And
yeah, that happened last night.
Yeah, we had we had some great games. I won't go too far into decks. I know they're relatively public, but
yeah, they're fun games. And
they were definitely fun games. You can check out. I'm sure there are VODs somewhere that have the games logged. If you really want to go to the Asian Avenger,
watch me get destroyed. The mono white match game that we had was hilariously fun. So
yeah.
So for both of you, what do you think of this best of one format? I know, Seth, you got your sideboarding class that is up on Spike's Academy, but what do you think of best of one? How has your experience been with that? And more specifically, how have you been testing for dual standard? Have you just been playing best of one and assuming that that's going to be close enough? Or have you been finding ways to actually try to play dual standard on Arena?
Yeah, so for those who don't know what dual standard is, it's basically a completely new format that Wizards of the Coast has designed specifically for the Mythic Invitational. So we are going to be playing essentially a best of one match with one deck, then a best of one game, I should say, because a game is the same as a match, or is different than a match. So one game with one deck, then one game with your other deck, and then if it's tied 1-1, then you play and you just choose one of those two decks. So yeah, as you're saying, it's a duo standard format, and And so, yeah, I'm trying to kind of juggle everything, right? Best of 3 has been the Magic that I've been playing for forever. I haven't known anything different until, I'm with everyone else here. I'm trying to learn what all of this means. It's not like I have some wealth of information of best of 1. Like, I've had no reason to play best of 1, but now, like, I do. I'm playing on Arena. I'm getting used to it. I think there was some negative feedback, right? Because initially, and I think that players might think that best of 3 is maybe more skill intensive, or there's more involved with it because of sideboarding. So part of that criticism makes sense. But then you've got another layer to this format, which is the duo standard of actually choosing potentially 2 different decks and how they might match up against the decks that your opponent might bring, and then choosing one. Because, like, a lot of times in this duo format, I think, like, what are the odds? Like, 50% of the time, you're going to split 1-1, right? Like, you're going to win one, your opponent's going to get one of those, and then you're going to choose a deck for the game 3. Like, it's basically a game 3 situation. And so, I've been playing on the Arena ladder. Like, I've been ranking up. I just hit Mythic last night. I've been struggling. I've been losing a lot. Like,
the ladder.
Losing is how you learn. Like, losing is how, like, you lose and you lose and you lose. Like, I've been spending a lot of time trying to figure this out. What decks I might want to choose for the tournament, what decks are good, and then can I brew anything? Like, even though the Arena metagame may be somewhat set, there's always a chance, right? Like, for the last Mythic Championship, I played a Dimir mid-range deck, which I basically designed myself. So I'm always kind of thinking, how can I reach that next level and kind of set myself apart from what everyone else is doing in the tournament.
Yeah. Like, pretty much this whole duo standard thing has been funny to kind of, like, test for. It's, like, kind of interesting, like, it's like, well, I want to see a game like a game 3. So I've been playing with, 2 separate decks. I've been playing 2 of the same deck, but with different builds. One catered to, like, hate out an aggro deck, and the other one to, play every other version of, like, to fight a combo and mid-range and slower deck kind of, like, play style. So it is a new format. And I mean, like, for me, like, I was originally not exactly sold on the idea of best of 1 when it happened. And then like, I was actually kind of on the fence about it. And then after playing it enough, it is just a whole nother format. So it's just like, when I think of it like, yeah, standard, modern, best of 1, I just view it as another format. So,
yeah.
And as you've seen from my stuff, Saffron, like, how I talk, like, you'll see my builds in best of 1 where people are like, wait, why are you playing this card main deck? Well, it's because we don't have a sideboard. So I'm just windmill jamming, like, unmoored egos in the main deck. And I'm like, wow, that's a spicy meatball. But so that's pretty much, like, how best of 1 is. And, like, getting ready for it is trying to, like, prepare for the ladder in a weird way. So, for me, playing on the ladder has been helpful, especially seeing as how I think deadlines are coming up for our deck lists.
Yeah. I thought I wouldn't necessarily like it because it was something new, but I've really actually enjoyed it. Like, I was skeptical at first, and it is, as you mentioned, a completely different format. Like, we're gonna have some specialists. Like, if you happen to be, let's say, an Esper Control specialist, maybe, maybe you're thinking about, I play only one deck, and you want to just play. You can play the same. You can choose the same deck. You can play the same 60 cards, and you can just play it as your only deck. That means you just play it. You play it again. And then if there's a third game, you just play it. So, like, you don't have to choose two different decks. That's an option. I think that actually adds another layer of kind of thinking, well, if there's actually a best deck, or if there is a deck that you're the most competent with, if it makes sense to just only play that, like, or why, or what if, or on the other side of things, why would it not make sense to only play one deck, only like the one deck? So there's a lot that I am still trying to think about. I'm sure you probably are as well.
Yeah, it's kind of tough. It's kind of tough. I tried a few other decks and I just didn't. I don't know. Like they feel weird. So I'm like, okay, well, let's try playing one deck but making two variations of it. And, so it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
One other question about the Mythic Invitational before we move on. Have you found it? Seth mentioned brewing and maybe trying to brew something for this format. Do you guys think that brewing is more or less difficult in Best of One compared to having a sideboard? Like, is it easier or harder to make those spicy under the radar decks actually work, or doesn't it actually make a difference whether you have a sideboard or not?
I think that it's like the format is different. So like I'll look at a deck that looks like a brew, right? Like maybe it has a card like Dovin's Acuity in it, and I'm like, all right, that's a brew. But that's actually one of like the top decks, right? Like it's like, okay, well, is it a brew? Because it has Dovin's Acuity and Unmoored Eco and Mastermind's Acquisition. Because in Best of One, Mastermind's Acquisition is a really, really good card because it allows you to access your sideboard, and that's basically the only way to access your sideboard. So there's all these weird cards that if you looked at the deck and we talked about what are conventional definitions of a brew in Best of Three, it might not apply to Best of One.
What about you, Krim? Do you have any thoughts?
Like for brews specifically, I think. I think there is a little bit of an edge. If, especially as always, it is, you get a little bit of an advantage if people don't know what you're playing, but I do think it is hard to make something work because Best of One is a fast format. It is a fast format. It feels like, you don't want the wrong half of your deck. And you really don't want the wrong half of your deck in Best of One. And I feel like in Best of One, variants can happen. Like when you're trying to, like, let's say for me, I've been playing like some control decks on the ladder, and like you hit all your creature removal in the control mirror. And that feels really bad. That's like the worst feeling in the world. Like I have all these Kaya's Wraths versus, my opponent's absorbs into fairies. But I've also seen some sweet brews. Like I've seen an Azorius tempo deck, like a flash deck that has been running around, and that one's been really sweet. Yeah, it even has a, Raf Capuchin and all of that. And you've got, you're still playing the control shell in like absorb, Teferi, negates, but you also get to play deploy. And I think, I don't know, like there's still room to always brew in Best of One, and the new split cards have been pretty good in Best of One because they are versatile. They're both a threat and an answer.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think those are some cards that Wizards has mentioned being designed pretty much for Best of One, or at least with Best of One in mind, giving you the ability to have some more narrow effects in your main deck. As long as one side of the split card is kind of relevant in most matchups, you can get away with having destroy target non-basic land and stuff like that in your main deck, which you couldn't actually do otherwise, which is kind of nice.
It's cool seeing those kind of cards. So.
Well, let's move on. We have one more topic that we got to get to today, which is our hot news of the day. Banned and restricted announcement went up. No changes, which I think is probably the most common prediction. If you look on Reddit and social media, I think most people expected no changes for this B&R update. Seth, were you expecting any bannings, or were you in the no changes camp? But especially for Modern, I guess, in specific, is probably where most of the conversation has been recently.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting any changes, and so, like, it seems like there's been so much happening. I get that maybe because I'm going back to the MPL, that's new to me. So that kind of is a little bit of a different subject, but also Modern Horizons, like, is going to be coming in, and there's going to be new cards entering the format. So it may be that Wizards wants to, rather than ban or unban something, they might want to change the format by just printing new cards. And that's a completely new concept to us. So I kind of had the feeling that because of that and the recent banning, relatively recent in my mind, banning of KCI, Crockland Ironworks, I didn't really expect a major shift at this particular time in Modern. But interestingly enough, when we looked at the announcement, they talked a lot about Nexus of Fate, because that was kind of the most recent banning, but not really a banning. It was just banned specifically on MTG Arena for Best of One.
Yeah, the Nexus of Fate question is kind of interesting. Do you think there's any reason to actually consider banning that in Standard altogether, Seth? Or at this point, we're getting to 6 months until rotation. Do we just kind of ride it out at this point and try to avoid having that kind of effect show up in Standard again?
I don't like the card personally, so that might make me a little bit biased. But just the idea of, shuffling your deck every single time, like the amount of time that goes into it, it's tedious for me. Like, they're foil cards that weren't even in like a real set as far as I'm concerned. I don't know. I don't really like it. So like, if it was something a little bit, if it was a different card, I would maybe have a different answer, but I would love them to just have nixed Nexus of Fate. But there's always going to be those people that picked up a Standard card, and banning a card from Standard after, like, that's rough. If you just bought your Nexuses for 20 a pop, and then they're like, that's kind of like, if they're banning them on Arena, they can just replace them with Mythic Wild cards. No harm, no foul.
Yeah, no, I guess that's one of the upsides of Arena, and that's true. Like, traditionally, Standard doesn't get that many bannings. I think maybe people have a different expectation because the last couple of years we had so many bannings that maybe people are more in favor of bannings now in a weird way, just because it kind of became the norm for a while with Kaladesh block and even Shadows over Innistrad with Emrakul. So it is painful though, and that's easy to forget. I remember getting messages from people when Emrakul was banned, like, I'm 15 years old, I bought a playset of Emrakul so I could build, I forget the Golgari deck at the time, the Golgari Graveyard deck, and now I can't play Magic now. They banned the card that made my deck work. I spent all my birthday money on this card, so I could see erring on the side of not banning things just because it is pretty painful, and it's easy for people like us to forget that, I guess, when you're in the MPL or when you play Magic for a living and have all the cards you need on Arena and Magic Online. It's a little different when you're 15 years old and trying to scrape together a deck for FNM or whatever.
I would feel miserable if that happened to me growing up, right? Like, I thought about it, like, how I saved all my lunch money to buy cards, and then if it got banned, oh, that's brutal. And
the one thing about Nexus of Fate, going back to that, is that you have to respect that, like, for myself, right? Like, I don't like the card, but keeping certain strategies that are different and unique in the format has benefit. Like, if you take out the Nexus, then that's just like, it could, like, a whole deck, a whole archetype just gone from the entire format.
Yeah, that's so. In some ways, even though people tend to not like the deck, I guess it is good for the diversity of the format to have another top tier deck built around Nexus of Fate. I still think most people would prefer it to be gone, though. I don't know if I can remember a card that has been more hated in Standard than Nexus of Fate. People just
remember all that Teferi hate. I haven't heard that in a long time.
Yeah, you lucked out, Krim. People somehow got the target on Nexus now, so your
He's not getting banned.
Well, it's honestly, you make a great point there, Krim, because it's honestly the same situation as we saw in Modern. Like, the target was on KCI, right? Yep. And now that KCI got banned, now the target shifts, right? Because KCI's already banned.
And now everyone's like, well, what's the next thing? Well, Faithless Looting needs to go, Dredge and Phoenix and all this other stuff. And it's like, what? Oh, there's always going to be something that needs to get banned.
which is fair. I mean,
so that is true. There's always something. One more Modern thing before we wrap up for today, and that is this new Mulligan rule. And you're one of the MPL players, Seth, so that means you will be at Mythic Championship London, I presume, playing in this grand Mulligan test in the modern format. What do you think of this proposed Mulligan rule? Are you in the camp where this is going to have a huge impact on Modern and change the way decks are built and overpower combo decks and all this stuff? Or are you kind of in the other side where you're like, it's Modern, it's going to be fine, it's not as bad as people think? Where do you come down on that argument?
Well, you happen to be talking to someone that hates to Mulligan, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure that this rule is going to benefit me. But yeah, they are calling it the London Mulligan rule. I think it's going to slightly benefit decks that mulligan more often, right? Because it's a way of smoothing out games. And so if decks, like if you're a Tron deck and that deck actually mulligans a reasonable amount. So like mulling to a 4-card hand, but you can just, like, 3 of those cards are the Tron lands, and your other card is a Karn. How much does that matter that you mulligan to 4? So I think it's going to be interesting. I don't think it's going to be a huge shift, but, like, the thing is that Modern, the percentages between decks are so, I sometimes think of, like, Modern as this format where you can play any deck, right? So now, if one deck is getting, a couple percentage points, that's actually a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that is very true. Do you think this will? So I'm probably asking the wrong person because you're almost infamous for your hatred of mulliganing and keeping everything possible. But do you think this rule will impact your deck selection for the Pro Tour? Like, are you going to be heading into Mythic Championship London thinking, I need to find a way to break this new mulligan rule and take advantage of it? Or do you just kind of do what you normally do?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, certainly it's going to be something that I'm going to be thinking about. I'm the guinea pig for this, right? So, like, I don't know how to test for, like, I can't really test this except, like, in person, but, like, also, there's a bunch of variables. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to fully comprehend what this means. So it could be that I also could overanalyze what's going to happen. Like, if I suspect that a deck like Tron, just pulling Tron out as an example, but say Tron is the deck that I feel like gains the most from this mulligan rule, and I think that, like, it's going to be a large percentage of the field, then you can also go the other way and just play some random deck with Blood Moons in it. It doesn't have to benefit at all from the rule. You just are going to anticipate the metagame and feel like this mulligan rule isn't going to really be that big of a deal.
Well, to bring this back around to where we started, how about the mulligan rule's impact on sideboarding? Do you think this greatly changes the value of, like, ley lines is an example that comes up a lot, that you can always mulligan into your ley line under this rule or whatever? Do you think this is going to have a big impact on modern sideboarding if this rule actually goes into effect?
Yeah, the ley lines in particular seem pretty busted. Like, I would be very scared. I'm very scared of playing a deck like Dredge that, like, you can basically just automatically find a ley line if you want it, right? Like, if you put 4 of them in your deck, I don't know the percentages, right? Obviously, it's not automatic, but if you get to play against Dredge and you have these ley lines in your deck, you can, or because I'm using Dredge because Dredge is a deck that can't beat a ley line if it's in play. You absolutely just have to get rid of it. So, like, you know that each game, if your opponent has ley lines on their sideboard, they're probably going to be starting with one in play because you can afford to now go to 4, go to 3, go to, like, however far down the totem pole. And yeah, so the ley lines definitely get better. I think we'll be seeing more of those. We'll be seeing more of, it doesn't necessarily have to be a 4 of in your sideboard, but if you play against a combo deck or a deck that you have a sideboard card that is going to almost win you the game if you draw it, you're going to see people just mulligan to that card. Because if you have a couple copies, of a card that is killer in a matchup, you're just going to mulligan to it, and that's going to be a reasonable strategy.
Find that stony silence against like affinity if you have to.
Yeah, it's gonna definitely be interesting. I'm very curious to see how this plays out. I'm also curious to see if anyone goes really deep to take advantage of it, because there are cards like Restore Balance, Ensnaring Bridge, cards that actually kind of incentivize you to have less cards in your hand. So I'm abnormally excited for this Pro Tour, or Mythic Championship, I guess. I'm not 100% convinced the rule will be a positive for the format, but I'm definitely very curious to see how this plays out and see what people do with this new Mulligan rule, because it should be very interesting, at least.
On a personal note, going back to the B&R announcement, I am happy that there were no changes, because that means that I can just focus on this London Mulligan rule and what it means, and I don't have to worry about the actual cards changing as well. So that's at least that's one bonus that comes out of this.
I think that actually might be one of the reasons there wasn't a change. Some people are talking Faithless Looting, Ancient Stirrings, everyone always talks about Mox Opal, but I think Wizards, maybe intentionally, is not making a change because it could skew the data on this Mulligan test. And if you're going to have a Pro Tour to test this rule, you really want to be able to compare what the format looked like with the old rule to what the format looks like at Mythic Championship London. And if you throw away random banning in the middle of that, it's possible that it's the banning that would skew the data instead of the Mulligan rule. So I almost feel like you just couldn't ban anything at this B&R and still maintain like the integrity of the Mulligan rule test.
Yeah, it's clear that they have put effort into thinking about this Mulligan rule on the WotC side of things. And so it's going to be interesting. I want to see how it plays out. Like, it's possible that there's just one deck that everyone's, like, not fully thinking about that just, like, got crazy good with the rule. But keep in mind, like, they did this for the last Mulligan rule, I believe, which was however many years ago. It's, like, when it was scrying after your Mulligan, and that was a new concept for some of us, right? And that was the latest change that they made, and we've seen on Arena they're actually doing hand smoothing for your draws to try to make it so that you're less likely to Mulligan. So there's definitely being an effort on the Wizards of the Coast side to make it so that games can be more interactive games and not just, all right, I'm getting mana screwed or flooded.
Yeah, and I think that's a good goal. Those are some of the least fun games, or the games where you don't actually play Magic because you just have all lands or no lands. So it seems like a worthy goal to try to minimize those games. We'll see what this exact Mulligan rule does to older formats. I'm really excited for it for Limited and Standard. It seems like, I haven't tested it either. That's one of the challenges. It's not on Magic Online or on Magic Arena, so there isn't really a way to play with it outside of in paper. But it feels like it should be good for Standard and Limited. Fingers crossed for older formats that nothing breaks. If nothing breaks, it does seem like it will lead to more fun games of Magic and less Mulligan non-games, which is probably a pretty good thing overall.
It also doesn't make you feel so discouraged. Like, whenever I take a Mulligan, I just put my head down. This is over. Like, I have to Mulligan. But now it's like, I'm playing a deck where you actually get to make decisions off the Mulligan, right? And this is a part of it that I don't think people are thinking about, but you actually have to choose which cards you want to keep. And that's another skill element, right? Where you have to think about, all right, you have to, like, how are these turns going to play out? Cause I only have, 4 or 5 cards or however much you Mulligan to. So it's going to be interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. Most of me wants to play a deck, to be honest with you, that wants to Mulligan, because I want to be Mulliganing in this. I just want to Mulligan. I want to feel it. Like, I don't want to go through the tournament and Mulligan like one time, right? Like, that's just not gonna be fun.
And oh man, and if Seth is saying that this rule is actually having an impact.
That'll work with Griselbrand, right?
Anyway,
you can try to dig for that.
Anyway, I think that pretty much wraps us up for today. We're not going to do fish mail this week. If you had questions in, don't worry. When Richard is back next week, we'll get to your fish mail. So, on the way out the door today, anything else while you're here, Seth? And definitely plug your course and your content one more time.
Well, I was here because you all were gracious enough to invite me on the show, first of all, so I appreciate that. I've enjoyed talking with you. I'm a big fan of MTGGoldfish and everything you all put together. And so Spikes Academy, as you mentioned, they are a sponsor of the podcast, I believe, but beyond that, like, I've recorded a course with them. They've worked with great MTG minds, right? Pro players specifically. And I'm one of them. My course just within the past week has become available on Spikes Academy. And if you want to see me, you want to hear my voice, you want to hear about sideboarding, if you've ever, like, I know if you're listening to this, I almost guarantee it that you've had questions about sideboarding. Like, everyone has them, right? So it's just a thing. I honestly feel like it's the subject that is the most discussed about, like, whenever I'm asked a question, it's almost always about sideboarding. So I'm happy to bring that content to you all, the Magic community. It's worth it. It's worth the money. And as far as catch me, Twitter, Twitch, TCG Player, I'm going to be around. I'm playing for the Magic Pro League, so I hope you'll see a lot of me. I'll be playing, tournaments throughout the year.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Seth. It was definitely awesome to have you on. Talk about your course, talk about all the MPL stuff, and yeah, definitely check out spikesacademy.com. They do sponsor the podcast. There are still, as far as I know, some 15% off discounts for new students if you use the code sideboarding. So thanks to Spikes Academy for supporting the show. Again, thank you so much to Seth for coming on. It was awesome to talk to you, get your insight on all this stuff. And with that out of the way, I think that brings us to the end of episode 214 of the MTG Goldfish podcast. So we'll be back. Richard will be back next week. Until then, have a wonderful week, and this is the crew signing out.